Okay. Hold on. A few more people I got to let in real quick. Keeps notifying me. All right. So welcome. We're going to get started here in a second. I keep getting notified of new people coming in. Nice to see everybody. A lot of you guys already know. If we don't, welcome. So just so everybody knows, we've got about 500 private and hard money lenders in the mastermind group right now, which is great. And we're trying to continue to grow that. There's been a lot of really good chatter inside the mastermind group as a whole. I feel like there's a lot of folks that have been able to help each other out. A lot of us are in different markets. So it's kind of a really good resource for everybody to kind of share experiences, share deals, lots of really good chatter and questions going back and forth. And we're going to do what we can to try to continue to grow it. For everybody, for lots of private and hard money lenders, I think there's good value for everybody to share experiences. That's kind of where we met Russell, and have met a lot of folks kind of through the group. In a second, I'm going to just let Russell do a quick intro, a little backstory, and then he'll kind of get started with his presentation. A bunch of us were at our inner circle meeting here in Maryland in early November, and the topic of how to determine the after repair value came up multiple times, and a few people had questions related to like, well, how am I determining the value? The markets are changing. What's kind of your thought process to do so? So in my opinion, an after repair value is an opinion, right? It's based on a lot of different variables. If all of us went in to buy a property to flip, chances are we'd all sell it for different prices because we all have different experience levels, backgrounds. The rehab budget might differ, things like that. So it's kind of a tough thing to do. And also remember, it's not bad to get third-party vendors, real estate agents, appraisers to help you with these numbers, but whoever has the economic interest, which is you or the capital that you're involved in, that's who ultimately has to make the best decision. Inside our operation, I'm the one that does that. Like, I'm not handing that off. I'm not hiring an underwriter. Like, that's a high level job to do. So I think it's important that somebody inside your organization really understands these values. So during this conversation that we had in our live inner circle event, someone asked that question, and I saw Russell's face just light up. And he went on a rant for like 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, not to embarrass him, related to this topic, because he's got a lot of experience with it. And you could kind of just see his passion in his face and in his voice as he was talking. So after he calmed down for a little bit, we're like, you know what? We got to put this on video. We got to do a little event for everybody in the group to share exactly kind of how you're doing it. And again, things are different in every market, right? Russell's in Texas. We're in the Mid-Atlantic on the East Coast. Like, Russell doesn't have basements. We do have basements. So different things to take into consideration. But Russell, why don't we get started? Do a quick intro on yourself, and then kind of jump in. And as we discussed, if you have questions, feel free to chat them or raise your hand, and Russell kind of will go through them in real time, or save them to the end, whatever's easier for everybody.
Great. Well, thank you, Jason. I appreciate you inviting me, and I'm embarrassed that I was coming across so passionate when I do, but I do. It is a hot topic for me, definitely. My background is I've been selling residential real estate here in Dallas for the last 22 years. Last year, the reason I'm just kind of giving you volume, just so you put it in perspective, or just some credibility. Last year, we sold 807 homes. We did 364 million. And that wasn't my brokerage, that was my team. I have a team here. We were also doing the valuations for, I don't know if you're familiar with, like Zillow offers, Open Door, etc. We were the exclusive broker here in the Metroplex for Zillow offers for the last 2.5 years before they went under, or they closed it down. And we were doing about 1,800 to 2,400 desktop appraisals for them every month. So I had a team of about 11 or 12 people that were doing that. And when Zillow really got into trouble, just as you're seeing with the other iBuyers out there, is when they go more to computer generated artificial intelligence, valuations of properties, and less people really digging in and looking at the minutia and the difference of properties and really determining value. And that's, so as I was telling Jason in this meeting, that I'm watching people make $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 mistakes on their valuations. And for us, in, you know, I've always been in the real estate sales side, but I've done a little bit of hard money lending, but not a lot. But when it's your money, you really have even a more keen interest in not making a mistake, because there's just not enough margin in there to make big errors and still, you know, properly protecting your capital. So that's why I was telling Jason that I thought might be important for us to really evaluate that. The world that I know is not as much, and what I'm trying to learn more is, how do you determine a value on a property that's in really bad, it's in the studs, or it's in whatever bad condition? Because a lot of times for realtors, we don't see, or certainly in our area, we don't see those on the MLS to really be able to see the comp. But what I do understand very well is evaluations of properties, of this is what it looks like as is, and certainly in a little bit, you know, typically, you know, not in the stud type thing. You know, it's either might be outdated or whatever. But so one of the things that I was telling Jason that I watch people make mistakes on all the time is understanding what is typical in the neighborhood or in your areas for a certain price range, and is the functionality of the home in line with that. So let me give you an example. In our area, an upstairs master is a real problem on houses that are about 600 to 700,000. In our area, if you're looking at say about 500,000, 3 bedrooms upstairs with only 1 bathroom serving it would be a real problem. It's not just I'm going to make an adjustment for $8,000 for the bathroom that's missing when I'm doing my adjustments. That's not enough, because there's a functionality issue. If you don't have a game room upstairs for X number of bedrooms, that is a real problem. And it's not just making an adjustment. I had a house that I also do, I provide the money, and I have a guy that does the flipping, and we split the profits. And we had a house, and he told me that the house was, that he thought it would sell for about $450,000. And I said, so I went and looked at it, and I said, this house doesn't have a fireplace, and it doesn't have the washer and dryer inside the house. It was in the garage. It was an older home. And I said, how many of the homes that you're using the higher comps for did not have a fireplace or the utility room inside the house? Well, when we dug in, we ended up barely, I don't know if we broke even or we lost maybe $10,000 on the deal, because it had a functionality issue. And I think that's one of the biggest things, Jason, that I've seen, is that people look at numbers on a, you know, they look at X amount square footage. They look and say, yeah, we did update the kitchen. But the question is, what is the flow? When you first walk in, you walk right in on, you know, the living room, and it's too small, or it's too narrow, or it doesn't, you know, I walk into a house when it's vacant, and I'm always thinking of the functionality of it. And I'm thinking of the flow, and I'm thinking about how does that fit in line with the other comps. And if there's a challenge, I'm either going to give it a haircut more or less, depending on the significance of that. And in my mind, the thing that I'd want to encourage you is to, I'm not trying to advocate because of a realtor. And first of all, the truth is most realtors are not that great. I mean, most realtors sell 3 or 4 homes a year. I don't know if you know that. So if you're ever talking to a realtor, what you need to do is make sure you get them to pull their exact numbers that they personally sold, not the brokerage, but them. And how many homes have they listed in that area? How many they represent on the buy side? And go back 1, 2, 3 years so you really see what is the knowledge they have to truly show their experience. And then I would try to find out for them. I have sellers all the time who will be moving to another area, and they'll say they'll want me to help them to make sure they're making the right choices on the ones that are moving to Atlanta. And so I'm saying to them, look, this is what you need to do. You need to tell your realtor for that subdivision, pull up all homes in there for the last 2 years, sort it by square footage. And then what you need to do is look in the last 2 years so you can see how the prices changed in there. And then find out from them, what is the expectation of a home between 400,000 to 500,000? What is the ideal floor plan that sells? And what are the challenges that you see that if it has this, it doesn't sell as well? Because you need, and it's very important also right now, guys, that at least in our area, everything was selling the last 2 years. Everything. You could put a piece of garbage out there and it would sell. It didn't matter. There was no discernment whatsoever by buyers because everything was moving so quickly. In our area, that's not the case now. So I literally just got through coming back from a closing a few minutes ago on a house that we put on the market for $685 and we just sold it for $590. And the problem was the backyard was a goofy backyard. It had it was a really small backyard. And I knew when I saw it was a problem, but back in May, it was right when the market turned. And so you could get away with it in May. You could not get away with it in June. So these people, we ended up selling based on the comps, this house about 45, 50,000, even less than what the comps say today it should be because of this major functionality issue in that neighborhood of this really small yard. It caused this house to sell for 40 or 50,000 less than what the comps would have told you it should have sold for, right? So it's really important that you understand, and because it's also in this neighborhood, all the yards were bigger in the back. This one had, you come from the side and the garage took up, a big part of the backyard. You had to come downstairs. There was no room for a swing set. How much are the things that are outside the norm? Find out what is the norm and how much does that impact? And make sure you always go find comps that reflect exactly the kind of challenge you see here and see what kind of haircut it was. And do not look in the last year or two when the market was hot. You've got to go back. You can even go back and say, I'll mirror a time 4 years ago and look at all homes that fit in a range 4 years ago when it wasn't like this, and to see how much did an upstairs master slow down the sale of a home. It did not have an impact at all the last 2 years. You're going to get a false read if you look in certainly the last year. So to me, it's trying to go back and mirror and see what are the unique differences of this house. First of all, you got to understand what a unique difference is, but you don't know that unless you talk to a realtor and understand what's the most desirable floor plan of this one story, of a two story. What if a secondary bedroom is next to a master? Is that an issue? How does that matter as the price range goes up? Because as the price range goes up, the expectation or the tolerance really changes. So the other thing, just side note, is make sure that you look at comps that are within 10% plus or minus the subject property. And make sure that if you have basements, you got to make sure you don't include the basements of that, or understand what is the haircut you get for a basement and pull that out. If you use homes that are a 2,000 square foot home against comps on for a 3,000, as you know, it's not going to be the same price per square foot, right? Because we know that usually it's about 1/3, roughly, is 1/3 of the of a square foot adjustment. So I was asking Jason if you guys are pretty familiar with that, and if not, if we need to have a separate conversation. Jason, I'm more than happy to help people to go through an appraisal from an appraiser and look at how do they make adjustments, right? And what is the variation? Now, to vary by area, but I think it's important, and for us as we're determining ARV, at the end of the day, I think I'm always looking at a property, even as a hard money person, saying, if I take that property back, am I going to be okay? What can I really sell that for? And based on that, is all going to depend on all those, looking at those things that might make this property unique. So
let me add a few things to that, Russell, as well. So keep in mind that there's typically two numbers that are important. Well, three numbers that are important on valuing a property. We're not really going to be talking too much about as is value right now. It's mostly on after repair value, but obviously your as is value needs to be less than what your core loan amount is going to be. If you're doing a loan of $150 with $50,000 in construction, you don't want the as is value to be $100,000, right? Because you're going to be giving them 100% financing on day one, and if they disappear, get hit by a bus, something happens to them immediately, by the time you go and mitigate and get that property back, your exposure is going to be 120% equity or 120% leverage. So, but on the ARV side, typically there's your ARV and then there's the retail ARV based on if they perform perfectly and what you think they can get it for. I mean, we're in this business, we're reliant on banks. Any way you look at it, even if you don't want to be. The reason why is your exit strategy is typically coming from a bank. They're either refinancing your borrower or your borrower selling to a homeowner who's going to get a bank. So it's important that both ARVs match up. Like, what's the retail ARV? What do you think they'll sell for? And what do you base it off of? We typically are very conservative. So if I think they could get 225 for that property, maybe we'll only lend off 200 and we'll work backwards based off that. A few other things to think about is you kind of have to have access to your local MLS. It's hard to operate this business without. we're also firm believers that we only lend locally or where we have boots on the ground on, because like what Russell said, over the last 10 years, probably since 2012, the market's only gone up, right? So you can make a bad valuation call and the market would save everybody. There's a lot of real estate investors out there that have done lots and lots of volume that don't really know what they're doing. And yes, they have they have an expertise in construction, and they've probably had a really good business, but the markets help them, right? Every property they thought was, let's say, hey, I think it's going to be worth 220, and then it's sold at 225 or 235 or 300. So again, I think in a market like this comes in, this really kind of has to be taken seriously to make sure you're comfortable with, with the numbers as the market's changing. And I believe personally, and I know different operators do things their own way, but personally, I like to have a local presence in the area, because I'll give you an example. And Russell and I were talking about this the other day, that the data is not going to tell you. You can look at as much data as you want, but this will not tell you is what your next door neighbor's house looks like compared to your house. So around here, we have semi-detached houses and townhouses. Depending on where you are, you probably have stuff similar to that. And I remember we did a deal, and it was during a good market, and the property wasn't selling at top dollar. Went back over to the house. It was a semi-detached house, so in essence, it was two houses right next to each other, attached by one wall. And the next door neighbors, the house was beautiful, right? They did a great job doing it, but the missing link was the next door house had a dog that was barking, that would try to attack everybody, that would come under the neighbor's yard through the fence. Their house was a disaster. Their backyard was a disaster. And who's going to buy a house like that? It was in DC. It was like a $500,000 after repair value house. Someone's going to buy $500,000 and they have this beautiful, nice renovated house, but their next door neighbor is a disaster. That's a hard property to sell. The only reason you can find that out is if you have boots on the ground and you're out that property and you do your research on doing so. In a market when there's whatever, things are selling like hotcakes, someone eventually will come in and do so. But in a slower market, you got to be a little bit wary of that. So in this, I don't think is to scare anybody out of doing so. But the beauty of this business model is you lend what you want. You don't have to lend 65%. You don't, just because the investor and their comps say 500, do whatever, lower it to 400, do 50 LTV, however you want to do it. All right. Keep going, Russell. If anyone has any questions so far for Russell, feel free to raise your hand. I think there's a button in Zoom that you can raise your hand, or just put it on the screen, or chat it, or put it on the screen. And I just don't want to unmute everybody at once because there's going to be a lot of background noise.
So one of the things also kind of goes, I'm going to high level for a second. What I always try to start off is in a subdivision is my first thing. And I will try to I'll pull up all the homes, and that only works in neighborhoods where you have larger subdivision type stuff, right? So let's say it's all the Wellington subdivision. Then what I will start doing is I will pull all homes that, let's say maybe I'll go 20% plus or minus subject property. And then I'll start reducing it to have where I'm within 10% plus or minus, assuming I get enough data points. And in today's market, guys, I used to go back and use comps 9 months a year, 3 or 4 years ago, and they were totally fine. I right now won't use comps. If I don't have something in the last 60 days, I'm really nervous. I would really be tightening that window because that market is changing. So in our area anyway, it's changing so quickly. So the first thing I'll try to do is look at subdivision. The second thing I'll look at if I don't have enough data points is going to be elementary school. The third data point I'll go, if I don't have enough data points at the elementary school, I'll go to a middle school, because usually, at least in our area, you have multiple elementary schools that will feed a middle school, and then multiple middle schools that will feed a high school. So usually if you follow that, it will also usually schools will kind of drive, and the quality of the schools will drive sometimes values in different areas. So I've always found that to be a good read. In our area, just as a side note, if you look at homes, say you got a big subdivision that went on for the last 20 years, homes in our area started changing in 2014. The whole different style, the openness of the houses, etc. You'll see a big difference of almost $20, $25 a square foot of homes that were built before 2014 and after 2014. But what you do first is you get all of them in a subdivision and then start looking at what are the differences. What is the year built? Sort by year built and see if you start seeing a difference of the impact of prices. I'll look and see about the garages, whether it's 2-car, 3-car, and then how much did that impact? In our area, an outdoor living area is a huge issue. So I'm watching houses with a really cool outdoor living area will give a much more favorable and increased valuation to a home because it's a section that a buyer's willing to pay for. So you need to go through and look and see, is there anything differences and what are the hot buttons in your area that if it has that, it's getting an unproportional increase so that you can understand that and reflect that in your after repair value. And so I know as someone who does comps all the time for sellers or helping them when their home's not selling or whatever it is, all these things that I just shared with you are the things that when you do it, it becomes so obvious the right price. It really does. Don't use a home that doesn't have a garage and you say, okay, I'll give a $8,000 adjustment for each garage. So it's a 2-car garage, I'll give a $16,000 adjustment. That could be a real functionality issue. It could be a $40,000 adjustment. You've got to find other homes in that area that don't have a garage. And if they don't, I'd be extremely nervous. It's interesting. One of my, I don't know if you've ever heard of Angie's List, but on Angie's List, I had a client that didn't pick me one time because they saw that I had a negative review on Angie's List. The only negative review I had was from a seller that was mad because I wouldn't take the listing. And I wouldn't take the listing because they'd converted the garage and made it into a game room. And I said, look, there's been no homes in the last year within X radius that did not have a garage. I don't know how much of a price, how much of a haircut to give, basically. And so I'm not good enough to get your home sold for you. And they wrote an Angie's List because 3 years later, interesting, Jason, 3 years later, the house still wasn't sold. 3 years later, they went through 4 different realtors. It never sold, but they're mad at me because I wouldn't take the listing just because of the impact of it without a garage. So the important thing for me, Jason, is just helping them understand is look at the nuances of a house, not just square footage and bed, and then look and see how does that impact in the market?
And here's the thing, something like that might in your local market or someone else's local market might be beneficial. Some people might not want garages and they want the extra square footage or the game room. Yeah. And again, the point of all of this is to educate yourself and kind of determine your own opinion of what makes the most sense. And it's hard to do unless you know the area. I mean, the good news is like you start small and you do it. Years ago, 16 years ago when we started, I mean, Chris and I, my partner Chris and I mean, we lived on the road for 4 years between DC and Baltimore. And even though we grew up in the areas and we knew the area sort of, I didn't know the area that I was willing to, do a $400,000 loan to somebody. I didn't know it like that, but we knew the streets. But you learn a lot by just going into properties, meeting borrowers, seeing what's reasonable in that area and seeing what's not, because there's a few things that are like, hey, if this property has this, like no garage in your case, who knows what that's worth? Like that's very undesirable. And there might be something else that, has to occur. Shoot, there's one other thing I was going to say related to that. I don't know. Keep going.
I also would not use Zestimate and Zillow as your guide for, is it the right price? You might use it just for an idea, but remember, Zillow lost $450 million last year because the whole last part of their whole iBuyer program was playing it off their artificial intelligence for their Zestimate, right? And they lost all that money. So whatever you do, I would not just use that number, because all Zillow's really doing is they're just looking within a range, but they don't know if there's different real, nice custom homes here and volume, blah, blah, blah. All they know is, of course, they wouldn't know. So all they know is they're looking kind of a range within an area, and then they're getting an average price per square foot to tell you. Sometimes, they'll get lucky and they'll be pretty close. And a lot of times they're way off. So it's, to me, as Jason, you said about having access to the MLS, that's really important, right? It's really important that you can keep digging in and drop it down to Excel and kind of play with it and really see to make sure, and again, Jason, one of the things that really stuck with me, what you said, is that the more, if you're not for sure, if there's any question, just either borrow, require more money down from the borrower, or adjust your ARV, or both. You have total control, and that control of how risky you want to be, it all depends on I believe the probability that you can really determine the price.
Yeah, and the lender should always have the least amount of risk on these deals. And that's the beauty of being the lender on this and not the flipper. The flipper is the speculator. They're taking all the risk on this thing. And if you want less risk, just reduce your exposure. You know, I think depending on what part of the country you're in, if you're living in like the median housing price suburbs, those are always the easiest properties to determine value. And then you work out from there, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, the around here, some of the harder things to determine value is, you know, let's say whatever the house, let's say there's a neighborhood with 300 properties from this, you know, a few different builders, 5 different styles, maybe a ranch or a Cape Cod, a detached, or a colonial, whatever, right? There's 300 of them, and then they're all built in, let's call the 80s. And then all of a sudden the main connecting through road has a nice, you know, has a property that you're looking to purchase. It's got similar square footage, but it's on a double yellow line, and it was built in the 40s or the 50s or the 60s, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. That's always the hardest comp to determine, because if you do it based on cost per square footage and that's all you base it off of, chances are you're wrong, right? Like this whole community lives in a nice subdivision that has potential sidewalks and things like that, amenities. And then you have another property that sits on a double yellow line on a through street that their front yard's is, you know, a busy road. Now, could that property sell for the same price? It's possible, but there's a lot of unknowns. There's no way to fully discount, in my opinion. On an appraisal report, you might find one that they have a metrics to do it. On my end, I just kind of do common sense. Like, what's it worth it to me? If the house in this subdivision is worth 500 grand, you know, is a family going to spend $100,000 less to have the exact same house to live on a double yellow line? Maybe. I don't think they're going to spend $10,000 less, but whatever that number is. So we try to just, you know, trying to just use common sense to do so. And you kind of learn from it. But like, I'll give you an example. We're doing a deal that's closing tomorrow that came in on Monday. And it's, you know, it's near here and it's in a good area, but it sits on a double yellow line, a big double yellow line. And the investor showed me comps, all comps, very nearby comps in a subdivision. I went out really, really far, and it was a busy street, or a busy, like a busy street that's big and goes, you know, through most of Maryland. And I literally just pulled out whatever that search is on MLS, the Polygon search. And I went miles and miles and miles away, just straight up and down that street. And I went back years and years and years. Sometimes I go back all the way to, you know, 06, 07, 08, when things were at the top. And then back to 9, 10, 11, 12, just to see how areas like that went up and came down. When did they go back up again? So, you know, deals like that take a little bit more, they're a little bit more brain damage. They take a little bit more kind of attention to detail, but again, you're investing in an asset. So just like anything else, you gotta make sure you're comfortable with it. The good news is, like, the easy bread and butter properties, the comp, I mean, they only take a few minutes, and Russell can probably attest to that, right? Especially as you're doing this over and over and over, and you learn the areas. I mean, I can do it in a matter of a few minutes. And the more sophisticated ones, you got to just be a little bit more cautious on and do so. You know, also, if I'll give you an example. So there's a lender here locally that's a very big lender, and they only lend in Baltimore City because they only know Baltimore City. And then a lot of other lenders don't lend in Baltimore City because they don't know Baltimore City. Same thing with Washington, D.C. and the suburbs. Over the years, we've learned a lot of those different markets. So we kind of have different areas that we're comfortable being in, different areas that we're not comfortable being in. A lot of the city stuff might be block to block. Maybe there's new developments that came in, you know, and if you've been around long enough, you know, sometimes it's challenging to want to be involved in some neighborhoods in the city where you're like, I remember where these properties were worth 100 grand and now they're selling for $1 million. And sometimes that's a scary thing because, you know, you've seen the trends kind of go up and down and up and down and up and down. But I always believe that some of the city stuff is challenging, mostly because they're older style, they're older than the suburbs. So potentially, if you're opening up the walls, and depends on what city you're in, obviously, you know, it gets a little bit scarier. You know, the other thing to think through, and this is more of just like general underwriting and not after repair value, there's typically less risk in smaller loan amount deals because or smaller property value deals, because let's say I want to have 35% equity cushion at any given time. Well, if I have a property at 100 grand, 35% equity cushion is 35 grand. If I have a $300,000 property cushion, 35% equity cushion is $100,000. There's a lot more room, you know, if stuff, you know, for hard costs and things like that, if stuff starts, you know, going downhill. But the other reason is typically, let's say you have a property that the after repair value is 200 grand and it's a complete shell, or you have a property that's an after repair value and it's 400 grand and it's a complete shell. Chances are your cost to renovate is probably the same price, right? Whatever, full renovation, $130,000, whatever it is to do so interior renovation. So in general, you know, if you're in the median housing price neighborhoods, you know, try to stay kind of on the medium to upper medium housing price neighborhoods. And personally, we've had a lot more success in the 6 different geographic markets locally that we're in, just because of that.
You know, one thing, Jason, that I will look at is, let's say that you look at homes that are within 10% plus or minus the subject property without a pool in our area, you might get a difference between 150 to 180 a square foot. So there's that's $30 a square foot. You got a 3,000 square foot home, that's a $90,000 delta. You got a $90,000 delta when you're doing your ARV. What is it? Why? What is the reasons why that homes that sold for more? Was it a blind squirrel got a nut and that one guy just got really lucky? Or was it really there's certain things that cause that one house to really do so much more and the one so much less? So when I even go on a listing appointment, I'll go show the client and kind of sit between them and show them, here's the ones that sold for more. Let's, like, the highest amount. What are the things that you unique or different, and help them understand here's why I think this one sold for more. Here's what the least amount is. Where does your house fit into that mix? So therefore, between 150, 180, what number should we use? That's one thing I just make note of. Make sure you look at the range and then look at the details of why one sold for so much more, and hopefully get more than one data point that did that. And then also what is the one for less? And then where is the person, your borrower, where is he going to put it in that, blah, blah, blah. The other thing is to emphasize is that the higher the price range, the higher the discernment of the buyer, that they have less tolerance for a goofier floor plan, some corners they might cut, etc. So I think you just need to make sure you look, whatever your area is, the average sales price. So in our area, it would be about 400,000. You can get away with quite a bit. You start getting 657, 800,000. You've really got to run a tighter ship, and all the functionality issues have got to be more important when I'm looking at the determining the after repair value.
Yeah, another thing that came to mind that, and again, this is a different conversation about how to communicate some of your thoughts to your borrowers. You know, because obviously you want to be transparent, but you also don't want to insult people, and you don't want to tell somebody that, you know, is passionate and has all this expertise that they think it's going to sell for 300, that you're not basing your loan off 300. That's a different conversation. But one thing that happens a lot locally, because there's a lot of speculation in a lot of the states that we lend in, is, you know, you base everything off a cost per square footage model. And then some of these developers will build this really big house in an area that just can't support it. And they're like, well, based on my cost per square footage, based on this, based on that, we should be able to sell for this price. And it's in this particular area, you know, that's not to say that there's nobody in that area that can afford that property or is willing to buy it. But, you know, when you want to attract the masses, right? And you want to make sure that that's kind of the median number that works there. And if all the houses in that neighborhood are, you know, rancher style houses and they sell for $300,000, you know, fully renovated, you know, and somebody comes in and wants to build a bigger house, a colonial, and sell for 400 or 450, you know, will it sell? Possibly. But like, I don't know if I want to be along for that ride, because, you know, their data is correct that, hey, cost per square footage, this thing's twice the size. And I'm not trying to get twice as much money for it. I'm only trying to get whatever, 30% or 40% of the highest sales there. But that's, you know, in cities and stuff like that, that's very common in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. skyrocketed a lot, and people were just building bigger and bigger and bigger stuff, or they're doing conversions and taking, you know, single family houses and turning them to 4 condos, and then they were just kind of like pushing the market and pushing the envelope. I don't really personally like being along for that ride. That's not to say it's not a bad business model, but I see that as being a mistake from a lot of real estate investors locally, is basing everything off of cost per square foot, and then all of a sudden either over improving or overbuilding in a certain area that just isn't ready to support it.
I also would make sure that when whether you access MLS, you get a realtor provide whatever, don't let them just give you 3 sold comps to help support theirs. I want to see everything. I want to see the canceled, the expireds, the withdrawns. I want to see why did this come on and why did it not sell and how long was it on the market for. I want to see all of it, because that way I'm going to also be able to predict how long it's going to sit on the market for, right? And do they have enough money, the holding power, to wait it out? And why did that one not sell? And what did that look like? I'm as interested in looking at the ones that did not sell and trying to understand why they didn't sell as I am looking at the ones that did sell to see, was it just a blind squirrel that got a nut on that one that did so well? Or now, oh, when I really dug in, I see the nuance difference that made that one better, or it was just a stupid buyer that way overpaid. I like to look at all data, and most realtors will want to just give you the 3 sold comps or whatever it is. You want everything. You want everything, in my opinion, 10 to 15% plus or minus the subject property in a given area, all statuses. And if the house has been listed twice and then put back on, you want to see, though they put it on the market at 445 and then had it on the market for 170 days, didn't sell. They put it back on at 465, blah, 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 blah. Right? You want to see the history so you can really get a feel, is my mind.
Yeah. And I've been seeing a lot of that recently because, someone will reach out and be like, hey, there's 3 comps at 300. It's like, you're right. There's also a really nice one at 270. Like, why was that? Like, what's that one? And the speculative investor who's trying to get high leverage and is a little bit emotionally attached because he thinks he's going to make a big profit on this deal, which hopefully he does, is going to go off the higher number. Typically, I mean, there's a lot of investors that are very cautious as well, but a lot of times they want to go off the higher number. I want to go off the lower number. And you're right. This did sell for 300, but this one sold for 270. And, when we have an in-house inspector, we used to do all our inspections probably for the first 5 years, going to every single property and on the front end, plus every time they ask for an inspection, we have full-time staff that does that now. And, I would probably be like, hey, if you can try to go stop by this. Yeah. I don't know if they keep your head through this window or something like that. Try to do some additional due diligence on the reason why. And the reason why might've been like, hey, the market was changing. I had to sell really, really quickly, but there's still that 270, public record data comp that's out there. So it's, again, I think a lot of this conversation is kind of going towards really understanding and learning your local market of what works for you and know what's what. And, it's hard to have, honestly, like, I don't even think appraisers are even good options in cases like this. I mean, mostly because they don't have an economic interest. And I think they're basing stuff off data, but, just the data and that's it, not the kind of the human element on it. So we've never kind of gone down that route. What we'll do is in like our internal process for valuing these things is I'll value everything kind of off, MLS, any past, anything I can get online first. Google Street View. I do like to see where Zillow's head is on stuff, just because to see if their data in their description and some of the data that they're aggregating from matches up to what I see in local MLS. I like to pull public records. I like to pull, if you're in a state that you can pull deeds of trusts and deeds, I like to look at those and mortgages and things like that, because I like to see kind of how much this was leveraged. I like to back it out a few years, 10 years, 15 years, just to get as much data as I can. And it tells a story related to the history of the property of what's going on. And then I compare it to other ones. And then we get our our employee inspector to go out to the property and kind of confirm everything. Just remember, just in case I don't say this at the end of this is these comps are typically like best case, right? Like this is best case. Like these are after repair value, assuming the borrower is qualified, they have experience, they know what they're doing, they're putting the right fixtures in, and everything else is aligned and they perform perfectly. Like you got to take these comps and you got to ratchet them down to offset your risk based on how well you believe the operator is going to perform, because not all operators are the same. And I think that's one real thing missing, that even if you really believe that you know what the value is, you probably could be right about you. I'm not claiming someone's wrong about it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that operator is going to get it at that exact thing. And inside our business, the way that we operate is I'm not nickel and dime our real estate investors that we do loans for. I'm not micromanaging them. We obviously have construction draws. We only reimburse on completed work. That's very important to do. As the property's improving in value, our exposure increases. But I shouldn't say our exposure increases. We're giving them more loans. As increases in value, our exposure should be decreasing. But like, I don't want to nickel and dime and babysit them and micromanage them over a few $1,000s. So I would rather either lend to the good operators, and if I'm not comfortable with them as a good operator, we lower our exposure. And I have no problem telling and being transparent with in my scripting up front with our borrowers. It's like, hey, listen, I know you think this property is worth 300 grand, and it very well might be. And at 65% of 300, it's a 195 loan amount. I'd like to do a 170 loan amount. The reason why is, there are some comps that are a little bit lower. I don't want to babysit you. I don't want to nickel and dime you. You don't want me to babysit you on this deal. I want you to have free reins, do your deal, perform. We'll give you construction draws very, very quickly in a day or two to keep it going. And like, that's how we do it in our model. I know a lot of other hard money lenders that they push it kind of to the top, and they like, hey, if they think it's worth 200, they're going to give 130. And they are going to be up their asses of their borrowers to make sure that it's done perfectly. And if they're off $1,000 on their construction budget, they're not going to give them that $1,000. I think that's a bad business model personally. I would rather reduce my exposure and tell them the reason I'm reducing my exposure, and because I don't want to babysit them, and let's do it that way. Let's unmute Chris real quick. Go ahead, Chris, if you can hear me.
Yeah. I appreciate you guys putting this together. Just a quick comment and then a question for you guys. Russell, to your point that you made earlier about the functionality of a house, I was underwriting a deal earlier this week, and one of the nicest houses that we pulled as a comp actually sat on the market longer and sold for less than a lot of the other subject properties we were looking at. And I came to the conclusion, but I wasn't 100% certain about this, that one of the main reasons was because the house didn't actually have a front door and like a walk up and a porch. It actually had a side entrance on the left side of the house, but the driveway was on the right side. So in order to like get inside, you either had to go through the back door or go around to the front door, which was on the side. And it made like a $45,000 difference from what it was listed at, which was 200, down to its sale price. So hearing your conversation about that kind of reinforced that may be a major role. And so my question is, I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio. And a lot of the areas around Cincinnati are up and coming because we have things like a new professional soccer team. They built $1 billion stadium in the west end of Cincy. We have some Fortune 500 companies and some companies that have just been listed as have gone public. So there's a lot of stuff going on in Cincinnati. But what that kind of leads to is a lot of places that are now street by street. And some streets are really, really nice. And some are just, they're not quite there yet. They haven't been invested in. And so one thing that we struggle with is that it's hard to find comps for some of those nicer streets, even though the potential is there. So sometimes we don't have any comps that are within, 60 days or, 6 months, let alone 60 days, especially in this market right now. I'm just curious. Obviously, you can kind of go by, you can go by feel, you can get other people's opinions and stuff like that. But tangibly or a little bit more scientifically, I didn't know if you guys had any tips on how to handle situations like those.
Jason, go ahead.
So I'm gut feel. So that might not be the answer you're looking for, but I'm always gut feel on this. But the only real data that I think has to kind of come from somewhere is your exit strategy, based on the exit strategy. Are these guys refinancing, are these flipping these? Because an appraiser is going to need real data on it. I would just take one of the nicer properties on the lower end street and use that as my benchmark, and I'd base it off of that. Although it'll end up selling for chances are more, but again, like my approach is gut feel, and you do kind of have to make sure that there's data coming from somewhere for this appraiser for the resale. But Russell might know better.
And my thought, first of all, I agree with you. An appraiser is typically just going to use, he's going to try to find like type properties in a reasonably tight area. But I can tell you, so I'm going to say something and then I'm going to tell you a quick example, interesting thing. What Jason said earlier about seeing the properties, if there's a piece of garbage next to it, buyers are going to walk up. If there's literally a piece of garbage next to it, they're gonna be like, there's no way in hell I want to live next to that. So I think that would be a major issue. It depends on how bad the houses are to the left, right, in front of it, in my mind, on how much I would give a haircut or whatever, or how nervous I would be of it. I can tell you, it's interesting. We had an appraiser. We had a guy that when all these houses were going way over value, this was about 4 months ago. And so the buyer had to sign appraisal waiver. It didn't matter what it appraised for. He was going to buy it no matter what. So what he did was he went to 3 different lenders at the same time, and he was willing to pay for an appraisal for all 3 because he's trying to get the highest appraisal. So he'd have to come up with the least amount of money, bring it to the table, right? There was so the house was listed for, I think it was $595, $600. My guy bought it for $685. One of my agents did. The buyer for one of my agents, $685 is what they bought it for. One of the 3 appraisals that were all done within 1 week, one came in around $620, one came in at $637, and one came in at $680. 3 appraisers all in 1 week. Think about that range. Huge range, right? Huge range. And so I would say this is that number one, appraisers are not, I go with appraisers with a grain of salt, right? I had a house that I listed that they're getting a divorce. The appraisal came in at $817. We finally sold the house 4 months later for $530. Shows you how freaking stupid they are. Mm-hmm. Because the market had turned. So then the discernment started coming in. The house, the people, their, dogs poop and pee and, and foundation issues and all kinds of stuff going on, right? So I'm not trying to scare people. I'm just trying to say you need to take a very active role, I believe, in the ARV, especially if, like your scenario, Chris, is a very hard one. If you're in a neighborhood where everything's very cookie cutter, it's really easy. But even within that, you can get a $20 to $30 square foot range. And you think on a 3,000 square foot home, that's a $60,000 to $90,000 delta. That is the difference of you being okay or not okay. So you really need to understand that's number one. And what you just described, I think is really hard. I would personally be very concerned about to the right and left in front. And then I would never give it the highest end. I would pull it down some in that. And then one thing I always love that I heard Jason say is that whole part, Jason, about the babysitting. Look, you don't want me to babysit you, blah, blah, blah. This is the most I feel comfortable. And if you do, I won't be up your bottom, right? I'll leave you alone. I just got to make sure that I've got enough in there. And if he's not willing to do it, walk away from the loan. When I'm doing appraisals for a seller, it becomes very hard. But I tell you, one of the best things that you need to do is ask whoever's helping you or ask yourself if you have access to the data, why did that one not sell? Why did that one sell for so much less? Why did that one sell for so much more? I want to see another one like that sold for that much more. What is it that somebody understands well enough of what made the differences? And then you can figure out where does a subject property fit into that. That's what I do.
Yeah.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Cool. Yeah, no problem. Yeah. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to hop in. I guess you can unmute yourself because I think you just unmuted yourself, Chris. So hopefully everybody else can if they want to. How much so Michael's question was, how much do you engage borrowers in showing you what, or showing you why they came up with their higher value? So personally, I don't. I like to know where the borrower's head is because I want to make sure they're realistic. And depending on who the borrower is, if I want to tease them a little bit, I'll say, okay, yeah, show me what comp sheet you're coming up with. But I don't take any of that. I don't really care about any of their stuff except what they think the value is, because I want to see where their head is. Because I think that goes with performance. Personally, if somebody tells me their purchase price, their purchase price, their construction costs, their credit score, their experience, their liquidity, how much assets, how much cash they want to put into this deal and what they think their ARV is, that tells me the whole story that I need to know with everything. Because let's be honest, I remember there was a story, a borrower called me and I had a conversation with him for 2 minutes. And I told him, I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, we're in, we'll do that deal. And he goes, how? You haven't got a credit application on me. I didn't fill out a loan application. I was like, I heard everything that you told me. And I know that I can do the deal based on it. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I was like, okay, well, you told me you have 10 rental properties that all have financing from a bank. So I know you have good credit. The price you told me for that you're buying the property on is a great price for that neighborhood. So I know that you know what you're doing. Your renovation budget seemed reasonable. Your after repair value seemed reasonable. So all of a sudden, like, you're a good borrower. So I think it's important to kind of get a lot of that stuff kind of straightened up. I mean, again, you can learn a lot about a borrower in a 2 or 3 minute conversation to determine if you feel they're comfortable doing, they're confident to do what they're doing. So Alexis's question was, is everyone using MLS, or are there additional quality MLS alternatives? I use MLS personally. I know Russell does. It's the only way I can do business. There are some alternatives. And when I say alternatives, I would say not as good, but there's spots to get additional data. Does anyone who was here in November remember what Robert uses? It was a software that he used that he showed me, and I did a screen share with him, and it was okay. It was better than, Zillow, but it was like a core logic product, I think. So like, it had real data. It just didn't have the flexibility that MLS does, that MLS has. But I mean, sorry, real quick. I mean, I'm on MLS all day. Like, inside our business, like, I have a tab on one of my screens on MLS, and I'm on it all day. I have to be for this is the only way that we can do it. I mean, we also get a lot of leads, and I'm looking at a lot of opportunities every day, but I'm pulling comps on that. I'm looking at, when I'm quoting deals and valuing deals and reviewing deals, or looking at deals that we have in our current portfolio to see, if they're on the market or if they sell. I look at all our deals in our portfolio and see if they're selling at the price we thought they were going to sell for originally, things like that. So personally, I don't see a way to do it without it. Go ahead, Russell. I think you want to jump in on something.
Totally agree. Also what it does is it allows you to go in, or ours does, where I can go look at all the back pictures. There's a big difference between looking at a price that's saying it sold for $435 and then looking at all the pictures and seeing why, right? And then looking at all the others. And one question I saw before about, do you ever get in with a borrower and engage them? Well, I tell you what I do with the seller. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do with the borrower or not, but you might do if there's a question, is that I will get on with the seller and I'll do a Zoom call with them, and I'll get into MLS and I will kind of show them what and why, and we'll look through the pictures and we'll talk about, like, if I know the floor plan of the floor or whatever. I have found Zoom to be a wonderful way to educate, in my specific examples, either my sellers or my buyers. And our world now here is our borrowers, of helping them understand, here, look at this one that sold for more, this more for less. How does this one fit in? What do we need to do to make this one look like that? Blah, 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 blah. And so I have found that Zoom is a great way to interact with people, and allows you your computer, and you can show them exactly what's going on. It's made a massive difference for me with my buyers and my sellers, and price reductions, helping them determine price, buyers helping them understand why is this more or less, etc.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, and going back to Michael's question a little bit related to that, is like, it's, I don't personally do it, but I can see the value of spending, like Russell just said, 5 minutes or 10 minutes on a Zoom with somebody and be like, hey, let's pull comps together on this property to see what's what. There's a lot of other things that happen behind the scenes that the borrower doesn't necessarily know about. Like, as I'm, sizing them up and underwriting them on the phone, that takes into consideration. I mean, because we tell everybody that, hey, we'll end up to 80% of the purchase price and 100% of the construction, but it's got to be 65% of the after repair value or less. And that rarely happens. I mean, that happens. I mean, we're willing to do it. And I mean, we do deals like that every month, but a lot of people don't necessarily qualify for that, either because their credit or their lack of experience, or they're not buying it at the right price, or I don't have confidence that they're going to execute. Things like that. So
Jason, can I say one thing real quick?
Yep.
You know, it's interesting as I was listening to what you were saying and I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about my world where I'm representing the buyers and sellers and I have fiduciary duty to them and I'm trying to help educate them, right? That's my job. I think that when you have a ton of leads like you do, you might not have to spend as much time to try to help educate and show value to the borrower maybe, and to bring them along. And for me, who I have more money to deploy than I have borrowers. I also want to win them over and show value. So if it's not this deal, that they'll remember how much I helped them and that I could maybe gain them in the future, or that they will rely on me as a trusted source. You know what I mean? So
No doubt.
like me with a client, the person's a pain in the butt. If I'm real busy, I have less time to deal with pain in the butts. And if I'm not very busy, I'm just thankful I have someone to talk to. You know? So,
No doubt. I agree with that. I agree with that. I mean, if you're getting one lead a day, and you're going to work the heck out of that deal in order to figure out a way to make it work. And if it doesn't work, and that's a fair statement, Russell, I agree with that, because earlier on when we got less deal flow and less leads, we had a lot of people in our office, trying to figure out ways to work. Like, this doesn't work. Go do it this way. So I do agree with that. Mike, I don't know if when you say, are you talking countrywide or statewide MLS? In our states, so in the states that I'm in, that I'm personally underwriting stuff in, we have one MLS that does like almost 3 states. But then when we get into some other areas that we lend in, some other states, like there's like 6 different MLSs charters to be involved in. And I know you do some stuff in a bunch of different states. So there would be, I'd guess, a few different ones. But like there's a few different hacks to get it if you don't have it. A lot of people I know are just chatting with their real estate agents that they're friendly with, and potentially help them get access.
Russell, how many MLSs are there in Texas?
well, so I think you're in Fort Worth, I think, Mike, right? So
Yeah.
If you look at like I don't know how many there are in Texas, but if you look in Dallas, we in the NETRIS, North Texas Real Estate Information System, it goes all the way out probably within about 150-mile radius. Tyler, for example, has its own MLS. You have different ones. Like Houston will have their own, Austin will have their own, San Antonio will have their own. But you're probably within 150-mile radius, and I know you go all over. But I'm assuming a lot of these hard money guys here are more local. I know you do in other states and everything else, right? But the answer to your question is, I don't know how many, but the one here in the Metroplex is a pretty wide range.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Jason, I can tell you that especially if I was in a given area, I don't even know if it wouldn't be worth it if I was these guys to get my real estate license, because it's so easy. I mean, you freaking fog a mirror, you can get your license, and you have access to all the data. And then what you could do is sign up like a discount broker. You just hang your license there, blah, blah, blah. And or B, you work out a relationship with a realtor saying, here's the data I want. And any clients that I have, whatever, I will refer them to you. I'll give you those leads. And that might be another way. But if I was you, I would want somehow with that realtor that I'm getting all that data that I need, and I can see the pictures and I can really dig in. And I can go back 3 or 4 years ago when the market was slower and see how did that impact it. Again, I cannot emphasize right now, at least in our area, I would only be going back 60 days. There's been a huge change in our area in the last 60 to 90 days, a huge change. And so you really need to know what it is for your area and really most realtors are more high I personalities. You can tell I am not on this profile. I'm a very deep.
Yeah.
And you want someone who's not everything's perfect. The world is great. I just want to sell. I'm someone who digs into data and I understand and love it, and or can give you the information for you to do that.
Yeah, good point. So Matt, yes. So his question is, did you guys ever use BPOs when you enter new markets? We actually get BPOs, internal BPOs, from an inspector that works for us right now. And we still do them to this day. And the reason that we do them is because it's not just our own capital that we're getting deployed. Like, we have investor capital as well. And I strongly believe that to be the most transparent you can with your capital investors, you should have, somebody else besides you, putting together a quick CMA valuation, BPO, opinion of value, whatever you want. But that BPO, for the most part, is not telling us anything that we don't already know. It's still our job to do the due diligence on the property and to determine what we believe the value is. And then we like to get, before it was like a straight third party BPO, I had, I don't know, 10 different realtors in different areas, and some were real estate investors that had flipped a lot of houses, and they were putting together like a BPO for us. But again, I wasn't basing our underwriting on what they were telling me the value was. I was just, using that as additional data to do so. So if I thought the property was 200, that, typically what would happen is I would think the value is 200. The BPO would come in at 210, 220, 230 or something like that. And then I knew, okay, cool. I'm conservative. I'm doing my job the right way, and I'm comfortable with this. But I would definitely recommend getting someone else's opinion on doing so. Typically what we do in our process is we charge $400 up front to get a financial commitment from the borrower before we proceed to begin with, because every time ever that we didn't get some sort of due diligence deposit or a valuation fee from a borrower up front, they didn't close. That's going to happen. The majority of the times, they're not locked in. Even if they sign your term sheet and stuff like that, you need them to pull out a credit card or send you a check or do a PayPal link or something like that to do so. We just call it an inspection and valuation fee. If they're going to go to a bank or an institutional back lender or somebody else, they're going to charge a $450 to $550 or $650 appraisal fee anyways. So it ends up being a little bit cheaper, but it's $400, and that'll give you room to pay for a BPO agent to go do so. So Michael just wrote, when I started, I got appraisals that I could get quick with a guy I met, but then I got comfortable with that. Yeah, absolutely. Like, you can still get them if you want. I strongly believe if you're using investor capital and not solely your own capital, that you should be getting a third-party valuation of some point. And put it in your file and document it with your capital investors as well. I mean, the way that we have stuff with our capital investors is everything's transparent. We have a folder for every file on Google Drive, and everything we have, they see. And that's part of the process that we put in there. So we've done, 3,000, 3,500 of them from the beginning. So that's just our everyday process. And, we typically, because I'm not going into the properties like I used to for the first several years, but that inspector is, and he's meeting our investor out there. And it's a good look to begin with, because then all of a sudden, he's in there on the front end doing the upfront valuation. Then he's the same person that's doing the inspections to make sure the work's getting done. The real estate investor sees him 3, 4, 5 times as a representative of our company. And, they create a relationship. And in essence, we could potentially get more deals from that as well. So everyone's not going to have a budget to bring that in-house up front, and you don't really need to. You can have, if you're doing probably 8 to 10 deals a month or more, you probably have a budget to do so. But before that, just pay somebody. What we did is about $200 for the upfront valuation, which is like the BPO. And then we'd pay them $100 to $150 for every inspection that they did for us. And we would collect $400 up front plus, $150 to $200 per inspection, per draw. So that's a profit center as well. So you might as well get a qualified person to help you do so. The one recommendation is do them quick. Everything has to be done quick in this space. We do our inspections. So we have different guys for our Philadelphia, New Jersey, and Delaware office, but our DC and Maryland office, we have an inspector. He's in, DC Monday, Baltimore Tuesday, DC Wednesday, Baltimore Thursday, because, every day he's got multiple that he's doing. And, that gives us flexibility. Like, what you don't want to do with draws, like draw requests for your investors or for your real estate investors, like you can't wait a week or 2 weeks to get them money. Like cash management, they need to get funds as quick as possible, but you need to make sure you're putting your eyes on the property. So we have a form on our website. Let's say they do it, whatever, right now, today. If he's depending on where it is, if he's in Baltimore tomorrow, he'll be there tomorrow. If he's not, he'll be there, the next day as soon as possible. And then we'll wire the funds right to the borrower. And that's a great way to kind of keep the deal moving forward and keep the borrower happy.
So Jason, do you actually go through, do you actually have any data from appraisers that show that how much of adjustment do you give for a half bath? How much do you do for extra bedroom? How much do you do for, do you use any of that stuff?
No, no. I mean, I'm not saying it's not good data to have, but we don't.
Okay.
Eugene just chatted. Do you charge all clients the whole interest amount up front for the whole term? What is the ratio between the potential clients agreeing to these terms with not? So I got some questions on that. They might have to unmute, but when you say charge the whole interest amount, so if we're charging like 6 months, if it's a 12-month loan, are we charging 12 months of interest up front, or are they just making each individual month's payment every month?
Yeah, hey, yeah, so that's what I meant. So for example, if the loan is for 6 months, right? The initial loan without any extensions, are you charging the whole interest for the 6 months upfront?
So we don't, some people do. So a few different questions on that. When you say 6 months up front, are you escrowing the money and then making monthly payments out of that escrow, or prepaying it and it's fully earned?
So it's more like a prepaid amount, and then you give money back if they finish the project. Let's say within 4 months, you give the remaining balance back.
You give them then you give them 2 months back afterwards, and so you're kind of just holding it, and you're kind of holding on their behalf. We don't do it. We don't do it that way.
Okay. Are there any advantages or disadvantages? Like, what's the ratio between clients that may agree to this versus not agree to this? I'm just
Well,
curious.
so there's a few different advantages and disadvantages. So to me, okay, so if you're charging 6 months up front, and are you adding 6 months above what your loan amount is, or are you taking that out? Like, for instance, if you're comfortable lending 100 grand and the payments are $1,000 a month, are you going to lend them 106 grand, or you're going to lend them still 100 and they need that extra $6,000 to bring to the table?
Correct. That's a later.
Yeah. So I mean, the disadvantage to the borrower is they need $6,000 more, which might be advantage, might be not advantage. I don't know. If it's a refinance, we do prepaid interest typically. Like we refi, like, because we're rolled into the loan typically on a refinance. You know, sometimes they bring cash to the table, but most refinances they're not. So we'll just roll in like 3 months worth of payments and tell them their first payment's due on the fourth month. On most fix and flips, they're always making monthly payments. We like monthly payments. I mean, for a few reasons. Number one, we're set up to do it on the back end, so it's easy for us. But it helps us keep track of the borrower, of where they're at inside their business. And unless you have a construction holdback, and even if you do have a construction holdback, it's still hard to determine, just where they're at. Just keeps an eye on them. Like, real quick if they miss a payment, and then you could figure out, hey, what's going on with this project, like really, really quickly. On that. So we like doing that. So for instance, if we close today, December 8th, the first payment would be due February 1st, because that would cover January interest. So we'd collect December 8th through December 31st interest as prepaid interest. Their first payment would due February 1st, which would cover all January interest. And then they would just make monthly payments. That's just the way that we're set up and the way that we like it. We like monthly payments coming in. Also, a lot of the capital is investor capital. So some of the capital is investor capital. So chances are there's an investor tied to the deal as well that wants to get paid on these. If you're looking to raise capital and you need more additional capital, you should be collecting monthly payments, or you should be dispersing to your capital investors as soon as possible, not on the back end. Like, you want your investors getting paid, their risk and their exposure decreases on that. Even if it's just principal payments, like, they're getting money back in their pocket. When we haven't raised money in years, 8 years probably. But the first 5 years, it took us a long time to raise, not a long time, but it takes time to raise large sums of capital over and over and over. And then after that, like, we use the mortgage office as our servicing software. I mean, there's a lot of these, that was the only option back then. There's a lot of options now, but that actually helped us raise capital because, investors get money whenever we get paid. So for instance, like, let's say, an investor makes a payment today, it goes into the queue and it gets dispersed to our capital investors. Every Tuesday, we disperse to our capital investors. So they get notified on Tuesday that the payment hits their account on Wednesday, because we ACH them all money. Like, we typically don't do any checks. The only checks that we'll do is if it has to go to like an IRA custodian, if they're using the self-directed IRA and they don't accept ACH auto payments to them. But by sending money back to your capital investors on a regular basis, on a monthly basis per deal, like, it's easier for them to want to continue to invest with you. And, they get paying money and it's like, oh, hey, I got more money. Can I give you more money? So I would recommend, like, if you're doing it that way, and I don't know, I would, even if it's your own money, like, I would rather just get the money out of your company account and get it to whoever the capital investor is.
Cool. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, I mean, if anyone else has any questions, jump in right now. Russell, any last stuff you want to add? I mean, I know the topic kind of diverted into a few different things, but that's fine.
Right.
Nothing wrong with that. Hopefully it was valuable for everybody. If anybody else has topics similar to this, or you believe that, you could provide a good bit of value to the group, and, something that you believe inside the lending business you're an expert at, feel free to reach out to us inside the mastermind group. Or if you have anybody that you think maybe we should interview, we can do the same. We're doing we do our coaching calls the second Wednesday every month. So next Wednesday we have that normal one for the group, if you're in that group. But I'd like to do kind of some more interviews like this, like we did with Russell. He provided a lot of value, and I appreciate that, Russell.
Pleasure.
Yeah, if anyone has anything else, feel free. If not, we can all roll out.
Thanks, guys. This was awesome. Really helpful.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you,
Thank you,
guys.
Good
All right,
luck.
guys. All right, take care.
Great session. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Russell.